Welcome into the latest edition of ESPN FC. Kay Murray, Shaka Hislop, Stevie Nicol and Ali Moreno here in the house. And there's going to be a lot to talk about tonight, but we will start by continuing with the reaction to Newcastle's big win over PSG. In fact, it's a reaction in France, though. Stevie, can you tell us what it says on the front of L'Équipe here?
Le désillusion.
Yes. That means disenchantment, the feeling of being disappointed with something and no longer believing it is good or worthwhile. Let's talk a little bit more about this. Julien Laurens is joining us. Jules, is that the feeling about Mbappé now in Paris?
Hi guys, very much so. It was a disaster night really on Wednesday night for him, of course, to start with, because as a leader of this team, you expected far more from him than what we saw on the pitch at St. James's Park. For the team overall, for Luis Enrique and his choices, his tactics, this is still match day 2 of the Champions League. There's a lot of games still to happen. They can still qualify, of course, so can Newcastle. But certainly for what we expected from the team and from the leaders of that team, it was certainly very disappointing, yeah.
Just talking about L'Équipe as well, Jules, we know they're famous with their ratings and how low and they can be a bit stingy with them, but 2 for Mbappé.
I mean, I think it's realistic, really, considering he had his first shot on the 85th minute and that was not even on target. Considering that pretty much everything that he did when he did touch the ball was not good. Wrong decision, wrong touch, or poor touch. Maybe the fact that PSG played that 4-2-4 and he played in the centre and not wide left, for example, didn't help him. I understand that. But still, you would expect far more from him than that. There's a lot of talk in Paris about what he does off the field in his private life, especially at night time, if you see what I mean. I don't know if that had an impact on his form in the start of the season. I don't know if what happened in the summer, the fact that he was pushed out of the squad for most of pre-season, I don't know if that has an impact right now on how he feels physically. But certainly the play that we saw on Wednesday night was just the shadow of the play that Kylian Mbappé is.
So everybody was awful, right? But when you're Kylian Mbappé and you have the keys to the kingdom, then you're going to carry a whole lot of the weight. Especially when you see the lack of attitude and the lack of fight, the carelessness, the lack of spirit, lack of leadership. And when I look at PSG, this is a team that has a leadership void that is very, very noticeable. And if indeed Kylian Mbappé is going to be your leader, he cannot be walking around the field and slow jogging it around the field. When you can sense the stadium is into it, that Newcastle is into it, that they have pressure all over you, that you have to match the intensity, and your captain and team leader, Marquinhos, team captain, but that we see at the front of the newspaper for PSG when they do things well, he's also the guy who's going to be at the front of the newspaper when they don't do so well. And yesterday was an embarrassing performance from him and from PSG. What
about the coach, though, Steve? We just heard Jules talking about the 4-2-4 formation and him not changing it either.
Listen, you can talk about formations and tactics, but if you've got a bunch of players, including Mbappé, who are not giving it 100%, because I don't think it's a stretch. When you've got so many players on paper that are getting these kind of marks, 2s and 3s, that's down to desire and attitude and commitment. And there isn't any of that. And the one thing that really I would love to know in the coming weeks is the reaction of Mbappe's teammates. Because every single person that's ever been a professional footballer will have played with somebody who will try and look as though they're trying. And that first clip we showed of Mbappé miscontrolling the ball on the edge of the box, and he gave it the classic as if he was trying.
But not really.
But not really. Every pro knows exactly what that is. And when your supposed star man, supposedly the best player on the planet right now, or one of, is throwing that kind of stuff in, I tell you what, the next couple of weeks, we'll see on PSG who is going to call this guy out or who's going to follow him. Because if it's one of my teammates, I'm calling them out, and I certainly am following them.
What's been the reaction, Jules, with the French media towards the coach and from the fans in Paris?
Well, we've discussed the tactics a lot, of course, that 4-2-4, which I agree with Stevie. It's not just about the system, because it's still the players within that system that make the system. For all we know, he might have started with the 4-3-3 and the disaster would have been the same. We will never know that. However, if you look at the way Newcastle pressed that team, and we knew before the game, in all the build-up, everything we talked about before, we knew that would be the case. They would be very aggressive. They would be on the front foot. They would press high, certainly at the start of the game. You do think that maybe another option in midfield could have helped that team. But again, we won't know. But I think Luis Enrique, it's not so much the formation, it's the fact, as you said, Kay, already, that he didn't change anything. Even if he still believed that the 4-2-4 was the answer, it was clearly not working. Do something else. Instead, every substitution was still within that 4-2-4, keeping that system until the end. And he's a very stubborn guy. He's always been and will always be. So we know that. However, on Wednesday night, clearly something was not working. Even if in the end PSG have chances and Dembélé could have scored 2 goals easily in that second half, still, I think the lack of correction in a way from Luis Enrique was still hard to understand.
And what's been made of where Mbappé was actually playing, Jules, the fact that he was playing more centrally? Because there's been so much talk about that before and whether the player likes to play in this position.
It's not so much Kylian in the centre or wide, because he's one of the best in the world, if not the best. He should really be good anywhere. It's more that Colomwani played on that left wing, where clearly this is not... He was a wide player when he was much younger. And clearly, at Frankfurt last season, we saw him in the centre. With France, he plays in the centre. And this is not really... Of course, he can do a job now and again there. In a game like this, out on the left, like he was against Kieran Trippier and Sean Longstaff and Almiron, who defends for his life all the time and runs a lot, there was no way Colomwani would do anything in that position. And that was a disaster. He didn't even deserve the 2. I guess for Mbappé, maybe the 2 is just okay. For Colomwani, I'm not even sure the 2 is okay out of 10. So for me, that was the biggest mistake maybe from Luis Enrique, was to put Colomwani there.
Jules, we're just going to take a look at the group standings, because it's something that we've been talking about on the show yesterday as to whether PSG are going to make it out of what is already a difficult group here. What are your thoughts on it?
It's impossible to predict. I mean, all 4 teams can still qualify. The next 2 games, obviously, home and away, back-to-back against the same opposition. So the PSG Milan, Milan PSG, Dortmund Newcastle, etc. will be very important. Of course, it will be. But even after that, there will still be 2 more games with 6 points at stake, where everybody will probably be able still to qualify. So it's fascinating until the end, which we kind of knew when the draw was made. That defeat at Newcastle will be hard to swallow and hard to take. However, this is better in match day 2 than in match day 6 when the qualification was on the line, for example. So now you just forget about it. You learn the lesson, and that's the only thing I said to Gab this morning. I'm not sure Luis Enrique is a guy who learns much from what he does. So that's the only thing here.
The other thing I just want to mention, Jules, is the fact that they're not top of the league when it comes to Ligue 1 as well. Is there a concern for PSG this season?
I don't think so. I think it's a bit too early to say, and we will see the reaction when the league starts at the weekend and after that. But I think they will be fine, really. I think that was a blip more than anything else.
OK, thanks, Jules. We will let you go.
Thank you, guys.
What about... we'll speak to you again soon. Chuck, I wanted to come to you on just looking at that group there. We were obviously talking about this yesterday as to whether PSG come out of it. What are your thoughts on it, having sat on it now for 24 hours?
I still think PSG come out of it. To start this, I thought PSG was the strongest team in the group, and it was fairly even between the other 3. And my thinking was it would kind of come down to experience. How Newcastle, with their lack of Champions League experience, would fare against a Dortmund who still kind of seem to have a hangover given what happened to end last season, and Milan, who've exceeded a lot of expectation over last season at the very least, and started so well. But now it's just wide open, to Jules' point. Now it's difficult to call, especially with these 2 games, with these games back-to-back, where we play the same opposition. Right now, you could make an argument for any 2 out of that 4, and I dare not make that kind of prediction until the next 2 match days.
OK, this is going to be one that you like even more. Are we focusing too much on what PSG did wrong and not what Newcastle did right on the night?
I'm OK with everybody focusing on what PSG did wrong. Listen, I thought, again, my concern for Newcastle in the Champions League was how would this team that so inexperienced in this competition, aside from Kieran Trippier, how they'd handle the expectation, how they'd handle the atmosphere within St James's Park. And then after a slow start to the season and a disappointing 0-0, well, you're happy for the point, but it was a disappointing performance against AC Milan. You couldn't ask for a better day. You couldn't ask for a better first home game in the Champions League than how things went against PSG. I know all of a sudden you are playing with a sense of belief that I'm not sure Newcastle expected him to be able to play with. And added to that, and you talk about Dan Burn from Newcastle coming through in the academy, scoring in the Champions League, players like Almiron, who Joe just mentioned, who was chastised up to a couple of seasons ago and then all of a sudden has just been absolutely outstanding. The feeling that the contrast between Newcastle and PSG is about individuals and hoping that they live up to expectation. Newcastle is about the team. And I thought you saw that. And I thought you saw the crowd respond to that. And it speaks volumes to what's truly needed to succeed at this level of the game.
A couple of things about the crowd in Newcastle. One, the electricity in that stadium, I hadn't felt that even coming through the television since the Liverpool second leg against Barcelona in Champions League a few years ago when they came back. That electricity creates an environment that as a player you can't help but be elevated, where you take your game to a different level altogether. And that crowd, they felt like they were playing the game as well. And that they were making a difference in PSG missing 5-yard passes, 10-yard passes. And so once they got a sense that they had an impact on the game, the electricity just ramped up to a level again that PSG could not stand and did not want any part of it. If they're able to recreate that time and time again in Champions League nights, it's going to be a magical ride for Newcastle.
Did they go through?
Yes, they do.
Stevie, first of all, before you tell me if they go through, tell me how impressed you were with Newcastle's performance against PSG.
I wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised. You know, for Newcastle, they got to figure... They'll get through this group 100% if they figure out how to play away from home in Europe. Because they set up pretty similar to the way they did against Milan and Milan. The difference is, when you get that crowd behind you, when you get the ball, it is not a problem to get yourself forward at 100 miles an hour. And that's what they did. I mean, they gave possession away to PSG and said, OK, you're going to have to beat us, but when we get it, we're going after you. I think that was the plan in Milan, but it's a different ball game away from home. So I expect them to do the same thing at home against Dortmund, against Milan. It's what they do away from. If they can figure it out away from home, then absolutely 100%. They will get through this.
What does your gut tell you?
I think they'll get through it because I think they'll beat both Milan and Dortmund at home. If they can grab a point somewhere, or as I said, figure it out and win a game, then 100% they get through.
And they already got a point at Milan, so that may end up being the difference.
Might be enough.